Hey everybody, Q here with another China Gold Oil weekly market update for the week ending February 22nd, 2013. And looking at the Dow, what I'm seeing is that we just can't get over this 14,000 level. We've been trying to trade over that for a long time now, and it's just not happening. And it's a lot like holding a big rock over your head. After a while, you're going to get tired and you're going to come down a little bit. So I see this next week a high probability of the price action coming down and interacting with the 50-day moving average at about the 13,650 level, 13,675 maybe. And then I actually don't see it coming up again. It'll probably actually get squeezed, possibly get squeezed between the 50-day moving average and the 14,000 level within the next 2 weeks. So this coming week it'll drop down and touch the 50-day. And then the following week, depending on the price action of course, there is a possibility it'll get squeezed between the 14,000 and the 50-day. So what happens after that? Which direction is it finally going to go? Let's check the weekly chart and see what we can see long term. So this is the 1-year weekly chart of the Dow Jones, and very interesting price action. This is telling me a lot. It's a very strong indication that we're going to be coming down within the next, I would say, 6 to 8 weeks. Like the end of March, I see the Dow Jones Industrial Average a little over 13,000. It's going to come down and meet this 50-day moving average like it did back here. So that's about the 13,200 level is what I see it ultimately testing within the next 6 to 8 weeks. That's why on the daily chart, I see it actually ultimately coming through the 50-day moving average below the 13.5 and definitely interacting with the 200-day moving average. Possibly dropping below it and interacting with a lower envelope. That's around the 13.2 level. Alright, so let's check out the S&P, see what that's. Okay, looking at the S&P, we can see that we did actually try to trade above the levels of the past couple of weeks, but it didn't last at all. It's a strong indication that it was not natural up there. We did not like being up there, so we came down. In the past couple of days, we've kind of leveled off at the 1500 level. So what I see in the future is probably not going up anymore. I actually see this coming down to at first interact with the yellow, with the 50-day moving average, and this is a lot like the Dow. Within the next week I see it coming down, probably right below the 1500 level. It's going to interact with this 50-day moving average this next week. And then after that, right now we'll go to the weekly and we'll check out long term. And looking at the 1-year weekly of the S&P, this is an extremely strong indication to me we're going to be coming down in the next 6 to 8 weeks. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, maybe go to the 9-month chart. Yeah, look at this price action. Okay, we hugged this upper envelope and then we leveled off at the top and created a couple of dojis. And dojis are strong indications when they're in the right, when they're in the right circumstance, in the right environment. Dojis can indicate a change of direction, and we've had a strong up direction, and now we have a couple of dojis, and we did actually hug this upper envelope also. And then we had a couple of dojis to level off, and this doji is very telling because it's bigger than the others, first of all, and also it is a red, so that means it closed below the open. And it did also play around with this lower envelope. It actually came through it and then it bounced off it a little bit. So this is major indication to me that we're going to be going down within the next few weeks for sure. And I actually see it coming down and interacting with this 50-day moving average a lot like it did here. And so that will probably be at around the 1425 level is where I see that happening. Maybe 1450. It depends on how long it takes to drop. Probably not 1450. It's probably gonna, well, we'll see. We'll see how long it takes. But within the next 4 to 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks, we'll see. But I do see that happening. Okay, let's see what gold tells us. Alright, gold in the next week or two is probably going to stay more or less where it's at. Either below the 155 level, or it might try to close this gap, and it might actually touch the 158 level before it starts coming down again, and that would be good timing within the next week or so to interact with the 50-day moving average at about the same time it closes this gap. So that's probably what's going to happen. If it goes up at all, that's what it'll do. It won't be significant or anything for the next week or two. But what I see long term is more dramatic. Let me pull up the weekly chart. And looking at the weekly chart, we can see we came off the 50-day moving average. pretty hard 2 weeks ago, and then this past week we interacted with the lower envelope, which does interact a lot differently on a weekly chart than on the daily chart. So you do have to keep that in mind when examining these things. And so what I see happening in the next few weeks is probably there's a strong probability it'll come down and interact with this 200-day moving average on the weekly chart, which is about the 148 level. So that'll be a 1480 in the price of gold before it actually stops going down within the next few weeks. And after that, who knows what will happen, but that's what I see in the next few weeks anyway, probably coming down to the 148 level. Let's check out silver. Alright, silver is continuing its downtrend, and it has leveled off. It did pop below the lower envelope just like it did back here when it gapped also, and then it leveled off and actually came above it again. But we can see the same pattern starting to form here, and it's not going to say that it'll be the same pattern, but you can see it's starting to form that way. So chances are it will level off at this point. I want to see how it interacts with this lower envelope. It could do any number of things. It could bounce down off it, or it could hop through it like it did back here and end up back on the inside, which it should. That'll be better for natural drop in the future. So that's the daily, and let's check out the weekly. Alright, 1 year weekly, and boy, what this is telling me is that silver just entered a downtrend. What could be possibly a major downtrend. This is the 200-day moving average, and you can see that this past week it opened above it and it went down below it and came off a little bit off the 2750 level, but then the week closed well below the 200-day moving average, so it just went right through it pretty much and closed below it. This bar doesn't show me any hesitation to stay at those levels. So what I see for silver in the coming weeks is a very strong probability that we will test these lows. Let's see, the low here was 25.34. So I see us testing this 25.35, 25.50 level before we stop this downturn. And this is on the weekly, so that's within the next, I would say, roughly 3 to 4 weeks. We'll be testing 26. And let's check out oil. And oil's uptrend is officially over also. That officially started for me when we traded below the 200-day moving average and the 50-day moving average. You can see we started to level off. We came off the upper envelope, leveled off, went down hard on it, and traded below it for 2 days, complete all the price actions below those two levels. Didn't really make it up above 22. So what I see happening in the future is probably the next week or two, oil most likely going to drop down to this lower envelope, probably around the 21 level is what I see happening. And this is the daily chart, so let's see what the weekly says. I'll go to the weekly, change it to a year. Wow, strong potential for down in the coming weeks for oil. You can see we tested this 50-day moving average on the weekly, and we touched the upper envelope. I'm going to zoom in a little here. Try the 6-month. And played around with this upper envelope, and that interacted with the 50-day moving average and with the upper envelope. And then the following week, this past week, we came off the 50-day moving average hard. So that was a very strong confirmation to me that this gravestone doji is actually a signal of a downtrend. What I see happening in the next week or two is probably, again, around the 21 level. It's going to interact with this envelope, but it will strong probability that it's going to trade below it and not really get hung up on it. I'm looking at this past activity, and here's past where the last time we tested the upper envelope and the 50-day moving average, and you can see what happened. We came off it very strongly, and we continued to trade down ever since this past couple of weeks. And again, this is a very strong confirmation that we're heading down again for oil. So probably about 21 or lower within the next 2 to 3 weeks. Time for some grains. And the 3-month daily chart of grains, you can see the downtrend continues. This is a strong sign to me that it's probably going to come back down and come close to this lower envelope again. Probably around the 51 level is what I'm looking for before it slows its drop again. But let's see what the weekly says. So I'll hop over to the weekly really quick. 1 year. Alright, we are playing around with this 200-day moving average on the weekly chart for grains. And we're more or less at these levels, but again, I see it coming down and possibly interact with the 200-day moving average. Let me zoom in and get a better look here. Yeah, that's right. Probably around the 51 level, it'll stop its growth. It'll stop its drop again, and we'll see what happens from there. All right, off to China. And looking at the FXI, we can see clearly what has gone on recently. This is 3-month daily chart. Had the uptrend on the upper envelope, came off it a little bit, played around with the 50-day moving average, and ended up trading below it and dropping down to the lower envelope and the 200-day moving average. So that's what we just played with. Within the next week, I see it coming up and interacting with the 50-day moving average, probably at around the 39.50 level, before it starts coming down again. So let's see what the weekly tells us. Looking at the weekly, we can see what's going on here. We are trading on top of the 50-day moving average and the 200-day moving average. So this next week, these are weekly bars. This next week, I see trading at the 50-day moving average and possibly interacting with the 200 also, but it will interact with these most likely around the 38 level, and I'm curious to see what the bar looks like at the end of next week. Let's go back to the daily quick and just see, go to the 3 months. Oh yeah, we bounced off of this, and then it'll probably hit the 50 and it'll probably continue that downtrend, but it'll probably get squeezed between the 200-day moving average and the 50-day moving average for a few weeks before it tells us what direction it wants to go in next. Let's see what Hong Kong tells us. And Hong Kong says continued down movement within the next couple of weeks. I see it coming down off of the 50-day moving average, probably 2 to 3 weeks, and interacting with the lower envelope and the 200-day, which is at about the 19 level. So that's what I see for Hong Kong. Let's check out the China consumer. And the China consumer is following more or less the same picture. What we see here is Wednesday we dropped off the 50-day moving average. Thursday we traded strongly below the 200-day moving average. We crossed right over it without hesitation. And then Friday we had a little doji, and that is a tiny little dragonfly doji, which is a tiny possibility, or there is a possibility that it will come up and close this gap this coming week, and that would be a good time to interact with the 50-day moving average also. But if that does not happen, there is also a strong probability that it will continue to trade below the 200-day moving average and most likely above the lower envelope. So I see this next coming week, again, either coming up and filling in this gap and touching the 50-day moving average, or trading below the 200-day and above the envelope, and kind of being squeezed in there and interacting with that as they separate as the week goes on. And that concludes your weekly China gold oil market update for the week ending February 22nd, 2013. I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you next week.